I'm Simon Jackman. I'm a professor of political science here at the University of Sydney. I'm also the Chief Executive Officer of the United States Study Centre, and I'm here with the Director of our academic programs here, David Smith, a graduate of the University of Sydney as an undergraduate,
yes,
and a graduate of the University of Michigan, the political science PhD program there, and now back on the faculty here at the University of Sydney. And we're going to talk about applying to American PhD programs, some of the things you might need to know as an Australian applying to those PhD programs. David and myself both grew up in Australia, both attended Australian undergraduate institutions, and both successfully obtained PhDs in the United States and now have academic careers back here in Australia. And so we thought we'd spend a bit of time talking about what that whole process looks like if you're thinking of going to the States for a PhD. And David, I thought I'd just start off with a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
How are some of the ways that the American PhD experience differs from the PhD experience here in Australia?
It's a lot longer and it's more structured. So in the United States, you'll do 2 or 3 years of really intensive postgraduate coursework. At Michigan, we did 3 years. It was like doing another undergraduate degree all over again, but in a far more focused way to get the grounding that we needed in political science in my case. Also, instead of just having a single supervisor who's there with you the whole time, you actually have a committee of people, which can be between 3 and 5 people. And so it's not just one person that you're reporting to, not just one person whose advice you're getting. You're getting an advice of a whole group of people. And as well as that, with all of the coursework that you're taking, this brings you into contact with a lot of other faculty as well as other students. Another really big thing about American programs is methods training. No matter what kind of approach it is you're taking to political science research, there'll be a particular method or set of methods associated with it, and you are going to learn those methods inside out. And in my case, I got to learn a lot of different methodological approaches.
Now, Michigan was a bigger program. How did that work at...
Yeah, Michigan, we had about 25 people in my year, but it was still a very close and, an experience of great camaraderie, and especially in the methods training, which was something none of us particularly wanted to be doing, but we knew that we had to do it. So statistics and game theory, you don't get through that without actually working together, which was very important. And you develop very deep friendships there, really deep relationships of trust. But also you know how each other work, and you know how each other's minds work, and you know what the sort of complementary skills are. So there's a lot of long-term scholarly relationships that develop out of those. You get a lot of long-term collaborators who meet in graduate school and start working together, because they share some things but are different in other ways that help with research.
Yeah, I really can't stress this enough. For me, that was probably at least as valuable to me as the coursework itself.
Yes.
Learning how you fit into a group as you sort of try to solve a problem together, learning about co-authorship for the first time, learning what you brought to the table, learning what your weaknesses were. Yeah. And indeed, the field you're going into, in our case, political science, is so vast. You're not going to be expert in all of it, or even most of it. You'll be expert in some of it. And by necessity, you're going to be deferring to or relying on the expertise and the intelligence, frankly, of others. And for me, learning that was so important about what it means to be a scholar, to be a good colleague. And that's one of the things, that sort of social element, that professional socialization was such a critical piece of it. So let's move on. Let's talk about life after the PhD.
Yeah.
The program you went through is a powerhouse in producing the next generation of political scientists, one of the better PhD programs in political science in the world. I imagine most of your cohort went on to positions in academia, but not necessarily?
No, it was only a minority of us went on to positions in academia. A lot of people went on to positions where their academic skills were very well used outside of the academic context. So people working for major survey houses like Pew or the World Values Survey or Arab Barometer. A lot of people working for various government agencies where an increasingly kind of high level of social science research is very important. Also people going into the private sector where the kind of analytical skills are very useful, particularly in some varieties of consulting, often very specialist varieties of consulting around healthcare delivery and things like that. But yeah, a number of us did go into academia as well. But it certainly wasn't the only choice that was available to people who'd been through that program.
Absolutely. That dovetails with my experience, not only as a student, but also as a professor in the United States. An increasing proportion of the PhD students we were producing at Stanford were going on to exactly those sorts of jobs. And increasingly the tech industry was also, and other businesses, as data has become more important, not just in government and academia, but in industry as well. We found that on the back of the methodological training, perhaps in conjunction with an area specialization or survey methods or something like that, the combination of methodology and a substantive specialization within political science was increasingly valuable to companies like Facebook and Google and whatnot. Let's talk about the money.
Yes.
Who paid your way?
So the University of Michigan paid my way, and that is fairly normal in American PhD programs. They're often quite difficult to get into, but once you get into them, the financial side of it is all taken care of.
Now, you got, when you say they paid your tuition. Did they also give you some living expenses?
Yes. So they paid the full cost of my tuition, which works out to quite a huge amount if you're an out-of-state student at a high-ranking American university. And yes, I also had a stipend. Now, I certainly wasn't living in luxury. I think it was something like $18,000 US. Although in a college town in the Midwest, that you can actually go quite a long way on that. Like, I never felt genuinely poor. But yes, this was all paid by the university. Being a foreign student at the University of Michigan, there were real restrictions on how much I could earn. Like, I couldn't really earn much more than that. I was only ever allowed to work on the campus of the University of Michigan, and I could never work more than 20 hours a week. So I was able to earn some extra money over the summer by being a research assistant, but I wasn't able to do anything else. So if you're an Australian student in the US, you're not going to be living like a king over there, but at least you don't have to worry about it. Also, something that's very important from an American point of view is healthcare.
Yep.
Healthcare is provided for you in graduate programs. It's not the highest level of health insurance that you're getting, but it is actually pretty good compared to other kind of early career healthcare plans that are out there. And that is absolutely necessary that you have health insurance, because the government won't let you into the country otherwise.
Let's talk about the application process. We've talked a little bit about that, but let's really get into that in some depth. What's the most important thing for an Australian student as they think about applying to an American PhD program? What's perhaps the most important part of their application?
Well, anything that is real hard data. The disadvantage that Australians are at is that when Americans look at their package, it's hard for them to immediately know what's exactly comparable between the Australian experience and the American experience. They're not generally aware of the relative quality of Australian universities. They don't quite know how our degrees are structured. And things like that. But something that is immediately going to cut through that is Gre scores.
What's the GRE?
A GRE is a real painful procedure that you have to go through. It basically tests your verbal and your numeric skills. And when you're doing this test, you think this is just this rote learning kind of really regressive way of measuring people, and surely a PhD is about developing independent research capacity. But what it essentially is actually a signal to the committee of your willingness to defer gratification for reward.
Fantastic.
So even if you're not ever planning on using numbers in your PhD, if you can get 700 out of 800 in your maths GRE, that actually signals to them that you're the kind of student that they're looking for. So the GRE scores are very important. You won't get in anywhere solely on the basis of it, but getting decent GRE scores will stop you from immediately getting removed from the pile.
And I think that's the key.
Yes.
So the GRE stands for the Graduate Record Examination. It's the PhD version of the SAT. SATs are used in undergraduate admissions in the United States. The GRE is used for admissions into social science programs. In particular, the LSAT is used for law school. There's the GMAT for business and management schools, but the GRE is used for other disciplines, and not just the social sciences, by the way. But David's absolutely right. The function it played, in my experience, was a negative one.
Yes.
If you didn't get above a certain threshold, the file typically was removed from the pile, and getting a high score wasn't a guarantee of getting in. Getting a low score, though, typically was a guarantee of not getting in.
Yes.
And David's absolutely right. For an Australian applicant, the Americans will be looking very carefully at this one metric that is comparable by design. And it's really important that Australians take this test seriously, that you prepare for it, you practice it. You will be at a disadvantage to your American fellow applicants who will have done tests like this perhaps more than the typical Australian kid has up to that point in their career. You've really got to practice it. It will get disproportionate weight for foreign applicants because the Americans on the committees reviewing these applications won't know what to do with a letter from a professor at the University of Sydney saying this is a great student. They haven't got good calibration on that, but they can make sense of it's scored out of 800, so they'll know what a 710 or a 720.
That's right.
That makes more sense.
The good news about it is that the GRE, it's simple to prepare for it.
That's right.
It's not necessarily easy, but it is simple. You can get preparation books and just lock yourself away for a while, and you can bring yourself up to speed. When I did it at the age of 23, I had not done maths since year 10, and I had done it badly in year 10. So if I was able to master the maths that got me through the GRE, I would say basically anybody can. Can we talk about letters for a second?
Let's talk about letters.
Yeah, so letters are also potentially a source of hard data, but again, Australians have the problem of Americans may never have heard of the people who are recommending them. And this is a big thing that Americans go on. You know, do I know this person? Do I know of this person's work? How much weight do I give to their words? Nonetheless, there are some important things that you can do to raise your chances. If, for example, you have an academic staff member somewhere in Australia who's been through the American system, who is American, and increasingly most departments have Americans in them, they could be a good person to write the letter for you, or at least give you advice on what should be in the letter. Always get letters from people who are currently active researchers.
That's right.
In political science, especially people with international reputations. I've sat on these committees as a graduate student member, and you get a lot of letters from people who should know better that are either from emeritus professors who haven't done research for 20 years, or they're from someone's favourite French teacher or something.
Yeah.
And those kinds of letters, they can give you a good insight into someone's character, but they're not very informative. It needs to be from somebody who is actually doing political science currently and can speak about the ability of that student to work in the current political science environment.
That's right. I can't stress that enough either. The letter writers, the references you might get for an internship, or going off to a law firm, or chasing a job in the public service, or whatever it might be, they are typically not the set of letters that are going to be very persuasive in a PhD application. You want active researchers at the very least, and preferably academics with some US experience either in their past or even more strongly currently. If there's been an American professor who has passed through on a visit and you think going to the United States one day might be something you want to do, perhaps getting to know that professor or taking a class on whatever it might be, so that one day they might be in a position to write for you to an American audience. I think that's pretty helpful. And it's something that here at the Centre, we've got American faculty coming through. David and myself still very heavily networked back into the United States, as are most of our academics here. Those sorts of connections, I think, are extremely valuable. The other thing, Australians don't write, Americans know how to write a good letter.
Yeah.
And Australians and Brits, in my experience, tend to write these underwhelming letters. You can have a very good student, but you'll say they're very good, whereas an American professor will say, this is the best student I've had in the last X years. And I think,
absolutely.
There's not much you can do about that.
When I write letters of recommendation now, and I've had plenty of students where I've been writing letters for them to go to a British place and letters for them to go to an American place. And the tone has to be completely different. When I'm writing the British letter, it's like the language of a John le Carre novel, where you're George Smiley briefing control in the most understated terms possible.
That's right.
An American, it has to be like an NFL player who's just scored a touchdown to win the Super Bowl at a post-game conference in terms of how effusive it has to be, while still being informative. So
incredible.
You want to have a letter writer who understands the terms in which you write the letter.
And that is almost as important as the name recognition of the letter writer themselves. It's a really important point. Other components of the application package, a writing sample?
A writing sample is very important. So
what do we mean by a writing sample?
So a writing sample is generally, in the US, they don't want anything that exceeds about 30 pages. So it's going to be, they often don't specify much more than that, but what it really should be is if you've done any original research.
That's right.
That's what it should be. So not necessarily your essay that got the best mark, but it's something that shows your capacity for original research, and preferably something that's connected to kind of current research agendas in political science. Something that shows that you have an idea about what is going on in this field that you want to go into. I have to admit that the writing samples probably aren't going to be read in full by anybody, but they just want you to get an idea of
they will play an
what you have
important
done.
Role as a tie-breaking mechanism.
Yeah.
If they've got to the point where they're reading a writing sample, it's good news.
Yes.
They're taking your file very seriously, and they're looking for that creative spark, that you actually kind of know what research is. You've got a little bit of it under your belt already, and you kind of understand what the game's about. Now, often that's tough for an undergraduate to do. Honours is a great pathway to that. One of the things you do in honours is in your thesis. And if it were me, I know in my case, I sent a chapter from my honours thesis was my writing sample. But it's got to be something, it can't be a good lit review.
The statement of purpose is another component that can actually be
what
pretty
is a statement of purpose?
important. Well, basically what it says, it's basically you explaining why you want to do a PhD at this particular place.
Question, yes.
This is misunderstood, I think, by a lot of applicants.
Yep.
This is not a statement about how you want to change the world or do good in the world. That's the kind of thing that you put in for a Masters of Public Policy, where you're really, it's a lot more focused on sort of what you're going to do after you've got this 2-year degree. What a statement of purpose has to show is that you are intrinsically motivated to do a PhD. That it's not just about instrumental rewards for you, that it really is about intrinsic interest that drives you to do research in political science. So you really have to show a familiarity with what current political science research actually involves. When you talk about what you're interested in, it has to be, I would say, related to current political science research agendas. And you have to show some familiarity with the program that you are applying to do. Do a bit of research about what this program's strengths and weaknesses are. Read some of the things by people who are currently doing research within that department. And especially sort of mid-career researchers. So not people who just got to the university, but people who are really well established there, but who are not at the end of their careers, people who are currently research active.
And who may well be on the committee themselves, frankly.
Yes.
I can't stress that enough. Too often, the statement of purpose that you will use for a master's program, that you will use for an internship, that you will use, say, if you're pursuing a career, if you're applying to DFAT or to a non-profit.
Yeah.
That is not the statement of purpose you send to a research-focused PhD program. It's got to be about the research. It's got to show that you're passionate about it. And remember, this university has a finite number of these packages to give away in a given year.
Yeah.
At places, at the top tier places, it's enormously competitive. There'll be 300, 400, 500 applicants chasing 15, 20, Michigan's a little bigger, maybe 30 offers they'll make. You've got to really jump out from the crowd there. It is not about necessarily your life story, although that can be relevant, but I go light touch on that. Too many of these things start with a charming life story, but what people want to know is why they should give you a 5-year funding package and make this bet, essentially, make this investment in you that is worth, over the 5 years, is probably worth $150,000 to $200,000 to $250,000 of the university's resources. Why you're that person and not someone else.
That's right. And your own personal experience in these things doesn't matter that much.
No.
I mean, especially if you're an Australian applicant, your life story is not going to be as interesting as the life story of someone from a developing country, for example. Or, from a non-democracy who's interested in political science. Also, I mean, you may have what you consider to be some kind of relevant work experience in government or an NGO. That is also not actually worth that much in terms of these letters. So stay focused on what it is that you actually want to do rather than on what you've done so far.
I think that's good advice. Those are the big key components of the PhD application package. I just to briefly recap. Test scores are probably the most important component for a foreign applicant, and they're the first branch point. You either make it over the threshold for your file to be considered further, and at that point the other elements of the application package start to come into play: the writing sample, the letters of recommendation, and the statement of purpose. But test scores. Get your file in that final round. Make it very hard for them to put your file in the reject pile.
Yes.
Well, look, I hope you found that informative. David and I, between us, have a lot of experience with the American PhD system. So do a lot of other people here at the Centre. If you want to know more, come to our website, ussc.edu.au, and you can learn more about applying for graduate programs in the United States.
Email us.
Thank you.
Thanks.